June 24th, 2022, 10:10 a.m. Eastern Time. The Supreme Court released its decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. Roe v. Wade, the nearly 50-year precedent guaranteeing federal abortion rights, was overturned. Within minutes, two women would frame the national response in ways that would define American politics for years to come. Candace Owens was ready. Her team had prepared for this moment. The decision leaked weeks earlier, so everyone knew it was coming. But knowing and experiencing are different things. When the official ruling dropped, Candace went live immediately. Her face filled screens across conservative America. "Today," she said, her voice steady with conviction, "we celebrate life." The comments flooded in. Thousands of messages per second, prayer hand emojis, American flags, celebration. But Candace didn't just celebrate. She went further. She called it a correction of historical injustice. She compared it to ending slavery. She said future generations would look back on this day as the moment America remembered its moral foundation. Her audience ate it up. Within an hour, her video had 1 million views. Within 3 hours, it was trending #1 on YouTube. She had captured the conservative response perfectly. This wasn't just a legal decision. This was a spiritual victory. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was in her congressional office when the decision came down. Her staff gathered around laptops, reading the opinion in real time. The room went silent. Someone started crying. AOC sat very still, her expression unreadable. Then she stood up, grabbed her phone, and walked to a quiet corner. She needed to think. She needed to be strategic, because she knew that what she said in the next few hours would define her response to one of the most consequential Supreme Court decisions in American history. Her first post came 20 minutes after the decision. No video, just text. "The Supreme Court has stripped away the constitutional right to abortion. This decision will kill women. We will not go back." Simple, direct, devastating. It was retweeted 50,000 times in the first hour. But AOC wasn't done. She knew that in modern politics, one post wasn't enough. You needed to dominate the narrative. You needed to give people language to describe what they were feeling. So she went live on Instagram. And this is where the clash truly began. Because while Candace was celebrating a victory for life, AOC was describing an attack on women's bodies, autonomy, and freedom. While Candace spoke of babies saved, AOC spoke of women who would die from forced pregnancies and back-alley abortions. While Candace invoked God and morality, AOC invoked human rights and healthcare. They were describing the same event, but in languages so fundamentally different that they might as well have been talking about different planets. The video of AOC crying during her Instagram Live went viral immediately. Conservative media pounced. They called it performance. They called it hysteria. They called it proof that the left couldn't handle losing. Candace made a video specifically responding to AOC's tears. "This," she said, "is what emotional manipulation looks like. This is what happens when your entire worldview is built on victimhood instead of responsibility." The clip was devastating. It positioned Candace as the rational voice against AOC's emotion. It positioned conservative women as strong against progressive women as weak. And it positioned the abortion debate not as a question of rights or health, but as a question of maturity versus childishness. AOC's supporters raged. They called Candace heartless. They called her a traitor to women. They pointed out that Candace was using her platform to mock a woman's genuine pain. But Candace's supporters saw something different. They saw a woman refusing to be emotionally manipulated. They saw strength. This became the pattern for months. Every new state abortion ban, every new restriction, every new law triggered the same cycle. Candace would frame it as a victory for protecting life and returning power to the states. AOC would frame it as an attack on women's health care and bodily autonomy. And millions of Americans would line up behind one or the other, each side utterly convinced the other was evil. But here's what most people missed in the noise. Both women were under enormous pressure from forces they couldn't control. Candace wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for a massive conservative Christian base that had spent 50 years working toward this moment. If she showed even a hint of ambiguity, even a moment of acknowledging the complexity, they would turn on her instantly. She had to be absolute. She had to be unwavering, because in the pro-life movement, there is no room for doubt. AOC faced similar constraints from the opposite direction. Progressive activists were demanding she go further, be angrier, call for more radical action. Some wanted her to support court packing. Some wanted her to call for a general strike. Some wanted her to describe the Supreme Court as illegitimate. Every statement she made was scrutinized for insufficient rage. If she tried to find common ground, if she tried to acknowledge that some Americans genuinely believed life began at conception, she would be accused of betraying women. She was trapped in her own expectations. The protests began within hours of the decision. In cities across America, thousands took to the streets. Pro-choice demonstrators outside the Supreme Court, pro-life celebrations outside churches. And in the digital space, Candace and AOC became the symbols everyone rallied around. Be like Candace, conservative women posted, showing strength and conviction. Be like AOC, progressive women posted, showing emotion and empathy. Neither woman had asked to become a symbol, but the culture war doesn't care about consent. Then came the state laws. Texas, Florida, Alabama, Missouri, Georgia, each state passing increasingly restrictive abortion bans, some with no exceptions for rape or incest, some criminalizing doctors, some targeting women who sought abortions out of state. The legal landscape was shifting fast, and with each new law, the Candace versus AOC battle intensified. Candace defended every law. She appeared on podcasts, news shows, and her own platform to argue that states have the right to define life as they saw fit. When critics pointed to a 10-year-old rape victim forced to travel to another state for an abortion, Candace questioned whether the story was real. When the story was verified, she pivoted to arguing that even in tragic cases, the answer wasn't killing an innocent baby. Her position was consistent, uncompromising, and to her critics, inhumane. AOC was on the opposite side of every fight. She traveled to states with restrictive laws, met with women affected by the bans, and shared their stories on social media. She introduced federal legislation to codify abortion rights. She called out Democrats for not fighting hard enough, and she directly challenged the moral framework Candace and the pro-life movement used. They call themselves pro-life, she said in one viral speech, but they oppose healthcare, oppose childcare, oppose any policy that would actually help children thrive. This isn't about life, this is about control. Candace fired back within hours. AOC says we don't care about children after they're born. Let me tell you what we actually oppose. We oppose government dependency. We oppose a system that destroys families and communities. We support life from conception to natural death, and we support the structures that allow families to flourish without government intervention. It was a perfect conservative response. It reframed the debate from outcomes to philosophy, and it gave her audience exactly what they needed to defend their position in every argument they were having with their liberal friends and family members. The 2022 midterm elections became a referendum on Roe. Democrats thought the abortion issue would save them from historical midterm losses. Republicans thought their base would turn out to celebrate the victory. Both sides were partially right. Young women, especially young progressive women, registered to vote in record numbers. AOC's messaging about bodily autonomy resonated deeply with Gen Z. But conservative Christian voters also mobilized, energized by the idea that their decades of political organizing had finally paid off. Candace campaigned for Republican candidates across the country, focusing her message on parental rights, religious freedom, and protecting life. AOC campaigned for progressive candidates, focusing her message on reproductive justice, healthcare access, and women's rights. They never appeared in the same state on the same day, but they were fighting the same war from opposite trenches. The results were mixed. Democrats performed better than expected, with abortion being a major motivating factor, but Republicans still made gains, particularly in states where abortion wasn't the dominant issue. Both Candace and AOC claimed victory. Both had evidence to support their claims, and both immediately began preparing for 2024. But something shifted after the midterms. The initial shock of Roe being overturned had worn off. The battle lines were clear, and both women started facing uncomfortable questions from their own sides. Candace was asked about states passing laws with no rape or incest exceptions. She defended these laws, arguing that the circumstances of conception didn't change the value of life. But polls showed that even most Republicans opposed such strict bans. Her position was morally consistent, but politically risky. AOC faced her own reckoning. Progressive activists questioned why she hadn't done more to prevent the Supreme Court decision in the first place. Why hadn't Democrats codified Roe when they had the chance? Why was she working within a system that had just betrayed millions of women? Some on the far left accused her of being too moderate, too willing to work within structures that needed to be torn down. She was being attacked for not being radical enough, even as mainstream America saw her as one of the most radical voices in politics. By 2023, new stories emerged that complicated the narrative both women had built. Women with life-threatening pregnancies denied care because doctors feared prosecution. Women carrying fetuses with fatal conditions forced to carry to term. Women fleeing their home states to access basic health care. These weren't hypothetical scenarios anymore. They were real people with names and faces and stories. AOC amplified every story. She brought women to testify before Congress. She shared their experiences on social media. She made the human cost of abortion bans impossible to ignore. "This is what they wanted," she said, her voice breaking during one hearing. "They said this would never happen. They said doctors would always be able to save women's lives. They lied." Candace responded by questioning the framing. She argued that these were rare cases being exploited for political purposes. She said that genuine medical emergencies were different from elective abortions. She said that sensationalizing tragic situations didn't justify killing millions of babies. Her response was consistent with pro-life ideology. It was also, to many observers, deeply callous. But Candace had never cared about being liked. She cared about being right. The philosophical divide became a chasm. For Candace and the pro-life movement, a fetus was a person with rights equal to the mother. For AOC and the pro-choice movement, a woman's bodily autonomy was fundamental and non-negotiable. These weren't positions that could be compromised. They were mutually exclusive worldviews, and Candace and AOC were the most visible representatives of each side. What neither woman could have predicted was how this battle would reshape their own political trajectories. Candace's uncompromising stance on abortion made her more popular with the conservative base, but increasingly isolated from mainstream media. Even some conservative outlets grew uncomfortable with her absolutist positions. She was becoming too controversial, even for people who agreed with her. AOC faced a different problem. Her focus on abortion rights was popular with young progressives, but made moderate Democrats nervous. They worried she was too focused on cultural issues instead of economic ones. They worried she was scaring away swing voters. They worried she was making the Democratic Party look extreme. The very passion that made her a hero to millions made her a liability to the party establishment. By 2024, both women had learned a brutal lesson. In American politics, being right according to your base doesn't mean being effective. Candace had the pro-life movement behind her, but she couldn't translate that into broader political power. AOC had young progressives energized, but she couldn't turn that energy into legislative victories. They were both trapped in a system that rewarded performance over progress. The question hanging over both of them was simple. What happens next? Roe was gone, states had passed their laws, the Supreme Court wasn't changing. The fundamental structure of abortion access in America had been transformed. But the battle between Candace and AOC showed no signs of ending, because it was never really about abortion law. It was about competing visions of what America should be. For Candace, America should be a nation that values life from conception, that empowers families and churches instead of government, that recognizes moral truth instead of relativism. For AOC, America should be a nation that protects bodily autonomy, that provides health care as a right, that doesn't force religious beliefs on people who don't share them. These visions can't coexist. One side has to lose for the other to win, and both Candace and AOC know it. That's why the fight continues. That's why every new abortion story, every new state law, every new election becomes another battleground in their ongoing war. The final irony is this. Both women claim to speak for women. Both women claim to be defending freedom. Both women claim the other side is authoritarian. And both are, in their own way, absolutely sincere. They're not performing for the cameras, though they're both brilliant at using media. They genuinely believe what they're saying. They genuinely believe the other side is catastrophically wrong, and they're both willing to fight until one vision of America defeats the other. The story of Roe v. Wade isn't over. The story of Candace Owens versus Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez isn't over. As long as these two competing visions of freedom exist, as long as Americans remain divided on fundamental questions of life and autonomy, the battle will continue. And somewhere, right now, both women are preparing their next move in a war that neither of them started, but both of them refuse to surrender.